or this is also what I needed to hear. Um, and so sort of the act of writing and sharing them was actually really helpful for me in my own grief and realizing that what I was going through was more common than it seemed because it felt really alone at the time.
Yeah. I feel like as young people, especially going through grief, dealing with something that is so life changing and sort of heavy, totally heavy. Um, it's like we weren't taught that this might happen so early in our lives. And so when it happens, we're like, there's almost a feeling of like, what is wrong with me? That this is what my life is now. Because I don't, like, none of my friends, like you said, none of my friends are dealing with this. And that's where that isolation comes from, I think, as from society not really knowing how to talk about grief or caregiving, which is like daily grief, um, as a young person's issue.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's a mix of us not really talking about it because we don't know how to talk about it. And so I think it makes us uncomfortable. And it's just they're hard topics to talk about.
Mhm.
Um, and I think so, sort of like in the void of that, what, at least like when I think about like, what did I think grief would be like before I experienced it? I would say, like, I thought that there were like stages you go through, right? That
Yeah.
anyone who's been through it will tell you like there aren't clean stages, but for some reason that's like the message that you get. Like there are 5 stages and it's sad and the first year is the worst. I think it's probably like somehow I absorbed those messages, but it's so much more than that. It's so much harder, it's so much more complicated and varied. And I did not really think about that, or I said I didn't expect it until I was, going through it.
Yeah. Um, that's so funny because we do get that message that like it's so hard at first, but like but really the hardest part, well, who's to say what the hardest part is? But it's
Yeah.
really hard. Like a lot of the support, if any, if you have any support, a lot of the support is front loaded. So like, you know, a year later, um, people aren't maybe calling you and saying, I'm sorry, but it's evolved into some like, it's even harder because you're still experiencing this and people have sort of forgotten about it or something, or they think that you've forgotten about it or something bizarre.
Yeah, I that was definitely my experience, and I think it's true for a lot of people that, when someone first dies, when you first have a loss, there's an initial sort of outpouring of condolences and support. And then people are checking in on you all the time. And then, pretty quickly soon after, people go back to their own lives. And, I don't really think it's anyone's fault. Like, no one can really like carry your grief in the way that you do. But that, I think for me, that period after like everybody has gone back to their own lives was really hard because I was struggling so much. And just the fact that it seemed like the world had gone back to normal made me feel like, oh, maybe I'm grieving too long. Like maybe I'm taking this,
Uh,
like too hard.
yeah.
Um, was the sort of implicit sense that I got, even if no one was really saying that to me. Um, and a lot of that is in the book, um, which I wanted to be a counterbalance to a lot of these like other external signals that sometimes we get that our grief is too much or our grief is lasting too long.
That's so interesting because that's the whole permission to grieve is like you have permission to do and feel whatever the fuck you feel. And it's, you know, somehow like talking about it in your own language is so helpful. like that's how I've felt about caregiving. Like all of the sort of resources or like other voices out there are, or they seem to me, especially at first, to be very like formal and very boring, or like, they just didn't offer any comfort or clarity or anything, because it wasn't in a voice that it wasn't in anything close to my voice. And so once I started being able to say like, this fucking sucks, like,
Yeah.
like, I love my dad and want to take care of him, but at the same time, this really sucks and I hate it every day. Like, and it's possible for me to feel both of those things at the same time. And that's that doesn't make me bad or something. So it feels like no one's talking about that. Like the sort of like up and down and zigzag and like backwards nonlinear journey that it is.
Yeah, I mean that's really real. I think it's so complicated, right? And I think we want things to be neat and we want like a storyline, and also we want people to be okay. I think that's where like a lot of people who say like you'll be fine or like you're
Right.
strong, and they can feel like platitudes, but I think that's coming from a place of them just like wanting you to be okay. But like you, I find it more comforting when someone just acknowledges how
Yeah.
shitty it is, instead of being like it's okay, being like I'm sorry, like this is so incredibly hard and I'm sorry that you're going through this. I find really validating, um, and helpful, and like you said, especially when it comes from someone who's coming from a place of like having been through something similar themselves. um, you know Kind of like what you were saying about caregiving, a lot of the resources about grief more broadly, a lot of them are written by grief experts or therapists, and there are a lot of really great books out there, but a lot of times when I read them it felt like very clinical,
Yes.
like I was a patient, being talked to by a doctor, which was helpful, but not particularly comforting. And at times I felt maybe a bit judged if what I was feeling didn't match up exactly with what the book was saying. And so, again, like this book, because I'm not a grief expert, because I'm just like someone who lost someone they loved, I really wanted it to sound like that. Like I wanted it to sound like a friend who's been through it and, is sharing what they have learned and what they're still
Yeah.
struggling with.
It's so, that's how it feels. Like it feels like my like best friend, like when I read the book, it feels like the voice of like my homegirl, like just like being able to, there's always a difference between like when you talk to a friend or my husband or anyone, there's like validation, and then there's also, you know, sometimes my husband will be like, do you want me to listen or do you want me to like try to like offer solutions? And because sometimes, because it's like you need both, but it's really hard when you're not ready to hear solutions and you just need validation and you can't get it.
Yeah, I think it's hard, especially since, I think that there's a lot of shared experience in grief and in caregiving, and also everyone's situation is unique. Like even if you're grieving the same person, your grief is not the
Right.
same. And so it can be hard, to know what to do. Like even, for me, I feel like my friends would ask like like what do you need? Like what do you need from us? And I'd be like, I don't
Yeah.
know, or what I need changes over time. And what I need is probably different than from someone else who might be in a very similar situation. It's tough. And so I think, I think in my experience, just showing up
Yeah.
is often just the most important thing. And I think that question your husband asks is a really great one. Like, do you want me to listen or do you want me to try to problem solve? And often I think just being there to listen is like more important than I think people realize.
Yes, yes. It's like I guess we're not really taught, or there's some kind of like idea of like, oh, I want to leave her alone, or I don't want to bother her. And that's just so not what it is. It's just not, I mean, you need people to show up and like bring you dinner that you didn't ask for, you know, and you need people to just like show up and just sit on the couch and like not even say anything to you.
Yeah.
And I wish I could tell, I try to just like get that message out as much as possible. And that's why your posts and your cards and everything are so important about like what to say to someone who's grieving, or what not to say. And also like asking like, what do you need, or what can I do, is not always helpful, because you don't know. I mean, I don't know, and it don't make me like try to think of it. That's like I can't even begin to do that work right now, like for myself. So how can I can't do that work for you, you know? So it's like I just need you to do some, just don't like disappear. Just don't disappear, and just the isolation is the worst.
Yeah, it's really hard. And, like it's hard to show up for people who are hurting. I think it's uncomfortable. It's not always fun. And it's hard to see people you care about struggle. Um, and I know that before I experienced grief, I definitely was guilty of being like, oh, I'm just going to give them
Yeah.
space, or like, oh, I don't want to make them sad by talking about it. And even though it's coming from for the most part, like a good place, like you said, I think unintentionally it can just increase the feelings of isolation, and even now, having been on both sides of it, I definitely more likely to say something and to show up because I know how important that is. And, I don't show up perfectly and I don't always show up in the way that I want to. So there's always that too,
Yeah,
but I think just us trying is the most important
that's
thing.
so true. Um, that's so true. Like, I try to always call, even though I know that they probably won't answer. Um, but I just know how much that means. So, yeah, but if you don't know, if you haven't been through it, it's hard to know. It's hard to know.
Yeah, something my friends do, which is so amazing, is they put, because like I said, like we all get wrapped up in our own lives, and it can be hard to remember to check in. But my friends put the anniversary of his death on their
Yeah.
calendars, and so every year, for the past 6 years, they text me on the day or they text me the week before to see if I want to do something for the anniversary. So little tangible things like that make a huge difference. And kind of like what we were talking about before, it's like a checking in year after year that is so important.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's so great that they do that. Um, like holidays too. And you don't even think about it, like Mother's Day is coming up. And I mean,
Yeah.
not only are there millions of people who have complicated relationships with their mothers, but also like, obviously people who've lost their mothers. Um, it's important to be sensitive about that, and it's easy to forget, or just being sad at the holidays because you know that everyone is with their loved ones, and you just feel that absence. So yeah, how do you feel about the holidays?
I feel I feel okay around the holidays. I think the holidays like just don't play as big of a part in my life as for others, but I completely see why the holidays can be so hard. I think for me it's the anniversary, it's his birthday that's really hard. Um, and then like some days are just hard for like seemingly like a small reason. Like I saw someone who looked like him in the park, or I passed by a coffee shop we used to go to. It's like things like that. I think I talk about grief triggers in the book, and when he first died, it felt like everything reminded me of him. Like everything went back to him, and everything just like was devastating. And now it's been 6 years, and so it's different. Like it's not the forefront of everything, but once in a while there will be something that reminds me of him, and it will just be a hard day.
Yeah. And that's what you write. I mean, what you write about is that it's okay. Like, it's okay even if there is no reason to have a bad day. That we shouldn't judge ourselves for it.
Yeah, I mean, so like grief is like it's hard and it's sad and it's also just really strange, right? Like it's so bizarre, and there's no real rhyme or reason to it, at least in my experience. um it's just it will change. I think that's true for everyone, but there's no really way to predict or control how it will change over
Yeah.
time.
It's so funny, like, as human beings, we are so complex and so layered, and it's just it's fascinating and bizarre how we can feel, two totally conflicting or seemingly conflicting ways at the same time. And, you know, I mean, there's just like endless, it seems like there are just endless ways that grief can affect you. Like, and like endless bizarre things that grief can make you do. I mean, do you think so?
Yeah, definitely. I relate a lot to the feeling of like having to hold two seemingly contradictory feelings at the same time. Yeah, I think in the book there's actually like a spread of like people trying to like
Yeah.
hold two conflicting things. Like, I knew this was coming and I'm not prepared, or like I still love them, I'm falling in love with someone
Mm.
else. This isn't my fault. I feel like I could have prevented it. I feel like so much of grief is, and a lot of what makes it just like so hard is all of these conflicting emotions that you have to hold at the same time, and that often shift, and like they can shift pretty quickly. um and it's complicated, and again, like I was really surprised just at how volatile and just how complex grief can be. um but at the same time, if we think about grief, we grieve because we love, and like love is complicated, right? So why why would grief
Oh
be
my
simple?
gosh. That's so true. You blew me away. Because our relationships are complicated. Like, even with even, my relationship with my dad, it's complicated. You know, for any reason, but he wasn't really, well, my parents got divorced, and he didn't, I haven't lived with him in the same house since I was like 10. And all of a sudden, we were living together again in this caregiving relationship. And like, of course, that's going to be like complicated. You know, it's almost like getting to know him again, but then also getting to know this different person that he's become. So if, that makes so much sense. Of course, like, because that is so complicated. So of course, like, my grief is going to be complicated. I've never thought of that.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's really true. Like our relationships are complicated when we're alive, and I think especially with people that we're close to, you know, they're just complex, and that doesn't end, and it doesn't end after they die. And I talk a bit about that in the book because I do also think that there's this sort of like taboo about talking about how people were when they were alive after they've died, right? Like, let's not speak ill of the dead. And that can be really hard, because you can, again, like you were saying, like you can love someone and miss the good things about them and also acknowledge that they weren't perfect. And a lot of us have complicated relationships. And sometimes after someone dies, we feel sad. We may also feel numb. We may feel relief. Like there are so many things that we can feel depending on our relationship with that person. And I think it's important to affirm that all of those are okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that it is so taboo. It's still such a taboo talking about people and what they were like after they've died. It's so intense.
Yeah, and it can be hard. And again, like it can be isolating if you feel like, publicly everyone is talking about this person some way, but like there are other facets of your relationship that you feel like you can't share because it's taboo. But I think being really honest about your relationship and who that person was when they were alive is I actually don't think it's disrespectful. I think it's like acknowledging and respecting the entirety of who they were, and there's something really
I
beautiful
was
in that.
just thinking that it's like it's almost disrespectful to not talk about the whole person, and turn them into some like two-dimensional cartoon that lives in like on a cloud. Like this, like it, it only honors the fullness of that human being to to talk about like everything that they did and who they were and the complications and the bad things and the bizarre things and the quirks and the struggles. I mean, it's like we're only supposed to like, especially, I mean, not especially, but with a father, with like a child parent relationship, there's so much of this like respect um element. But if you but if you experience these intimate moments and really know who your parent is as a whole person, then it's not just, yes, sir, I respect my dad. It's like I could write a book about all of the like just complexities of who he is and who he's been.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there's something really powerful about acknowledging that, like a person's like all the facets of a person, like you said, instead of like a flattening down of who they were into a more palatable version because that version is, I don't know, it's not as interesting, I
Yeah,
think, and it's not as true.
right. And it sort of flattens out like the whole human experience because it's like, okay, you have this whole life and then you die and then you become a cartoon. Well, like that sucks, like if anyone's going to remember me and talk about me, I want it to be real because that's gonna have a greater impact. And that's really what it's like to like leave any kind of mark on the world or on people.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
Yeah. Well, I have no idea what time it is. Oh, okay, 6:30. Okay. So have you heard this statistic that it's like 1 in 4 people in the United States are bereaved right now due to the pandemic?
Yeah. Yeah, I have. It's an astounding number. It's like a heartbreaking number.
Yeah. It's like if 1 in 4 people are bereaved, then that means that everyone is affected, right? Because that means a lot of bereaved people. So we're all in this together. And so, I mean, I know you're not a grief expert, but what do you think? What do you think we need to do? I mean, what do you think we can begin to do as a society?
Yeah. Man, I wish I wish I knew. It's like such a huge question. I think on a personal level, like I think the little things matter, kind of like what we talked about before. I think checking in on each other, making sure that that person feels seen and connected is so valuable. And like all the time, but especially the last couple of years where we've been especially
Yes.
isolated. Um, I think there's a lot of comfort in community, and now we have to maybe be a little bit more creative in what that community looks like.
Yeah.
Um, but I think again, like showing up, just saying like, I see you, I see what you're going through, I'm here is so so important. Um, and I think structurally, I think we need some changes. I think we need some big changes. I think there's things we can do to take care of ourselves as caregivers and as grieving people. I think there are things we can do to show up for each other. And I think we're operating within a society that doesn't structurally make space for it.
Yeah.
So things like bereavement leave for caregivers, like those are changes I think we need to make at a societal level. So, and otherwise I think it's hard. There's only so much that we can do as individuals.